Oh, I see. Thank you for the note. I see that my colleague from New Jersey is on the floor, and I would welcome a question if he has one.
I appreciate it, and appreciate my colleague pausing for a question. And I just want to first say, as I present my question to him, how grateful I am for his stamina and for his strength, but more even importantly for his insightful truths that he has been telling now for well over 14 hours. And in many ways, we see a tradition in this body of being a deliberative body, but it seems now more and more that deliberation is giving way to what the founders never imagined, which is simply conceding to anything that the President of the United States wants. We were born to check and balance the presidency. We are the Article I branch of government. And as my colleague here rings the alarm bell, it is clear to me that the alarm bell he's ringing is not a partisan alarm bell. It's not left or right, it's right or wrong. It's about asserting the Article I branch of the Constitution's strength, its purpose, its constitutional intent. And that is to provide oversight. That is to provide advice and consent. That is to provide the check and balance that we need. And for hours now, what I have been seeing is my colleague, Jeff Merkley, has time and time again been laying plain facts that would not play no matter what party a person is from. A president who is encroaching again and again and again on the constitutional prerogatives of the Article I branch of government. And the result of this is that people are hurting. And I really want to get my colleagues' response to this. The fact is, right now, you have a president not going through Congress, not working with Congress, but undermining congressional intent by gutting and cutting programs, gutting and cutting agencies, gutting and cutting bipartisan approved resources for our states in ways that threaten and undermine the well-being of Americans. We see him approving a tariff policy, not one that has gone through this body. In fact, I would say not one that people in this body would even agree on, that is hurting American farmers, that is driving them to their knees. They want trade, not aid. And as a result of that tariff policy, it's not only hurting the bedrock people who put food on the table for Americans and people throughout this world, but it's hurting consumers by driving up grocery prices. What my colleague continues to point out is how these violations of our constitutional norms and traditions, the insult and injury done to our Constitution, has a real-life impact on the lives of Americans, making us poorer, making us sicker in our lack of access to health care. That we are seeing a time now that if we do not ring the alarm bells, more and more Americans will be hurt by a president who is acting more like an authoritarian leader than a democratically elected executive in the Article II branch. And this is not a left or right moment. It is a right or wrong moment. This is a moral moment in America. And I love what Martin Luther King said. He said, the problem today is not the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, it's the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. And so this is a time that my colleague, through doing this extraordinary step here for more than 14 hours, all through the night, standing up and saying, look, democracy has never been a spectator sport. If you love this country, if you love in a deep devotion the ideals of patriotism more than a party, now is the time for all good people to stand up and call it out. And so I want to know from my colleague, this, with the urgency that we have in this moment, with Americans seeing their energy costs go up, with Americans seeing their grocery costs going up, with Americans now seeing the reality of their health care costs going up thousands and thousands of dollars, with marginalized people, with folks who are struggling to provide for their children, for children with disabilities struggling to get the resources they need, with parents not knowing how they're going to meet the rent and pay for medical expenses, how they're going to be able to pay for the basic needs of their families. This is a time that if you believe in the cherished principles of our nation, from patriotism, devotion to our national ideals, if you believe in the ideals of our nation, love thy neighbor, if you believe that we are one nation under God, this must be the time where more people stand up and speak out, because the only thing necessary for the triumph of tyranny is for a free people to remain silent. And so I ask my colleague right now, because there are people saying, what does it matter that a senator is standing up? I ask my colleague right now to maybe say directly to the American people why you are taking this courageous stand tonight, what you hope they will take away, because it's not about you or me, it's not about the 100 people here. We have seen this president back down before, when the American people in a chorus of conviction stand up and say no, no more. As Frederick Douglass says, the limits of tyranny are prescribed by the people who face the oppression. I ask my colleague, what is the message that you are trying to send with this courageous stand, with this incredible endurance, with this strong speech you are giving today?
To my colleague from New Jersey, the message most important is that the tyranny has already arrived. It is not down the street. It is not around the corner. It will not be encountered on the path tomorrow. It is here at this very moment. And that tyranny comes in two forms, so important to our country. The first is the attack on freedom. Freedom is secured by due process. So when an authoritarian president runs over due process, he threatens freedom for all of us. When an authoritarian president says, I will dictate through research grant control what universities teach, he's stealing the academic freedom of our independent universities and really gutting the vision that people go to universities to explore ideas and to learn, not to receive propaganda written by a government. If you want that version of the world, that's not freedom. That's found in tyrannical governments. That's found in China, not here at our universities in the United States of America. When he proceeds to say we are going to control law firms by suing them and taking away their security clearances and extorting them to put $1 billion of free law into causes the president wants, that is a form of tyranny against the free enterprise of law firms to have the clients they want and serve the people they want. I read an article sometime in the middle of the night that was about the profound impact on nonprofits that are out of favor with the president, and therefore they're not getting the legal help that they had in the past, and how that affects their largely impoverished clients. So there's damage that ripples through the universe from these attacks on freedom. And now is the moment where we have seen the fundamental separation of powers disappear. No, I thought of these robust branches of government, the executive, the Congress, the judiciary, each valiantly defending their role in order to preserve the checks and balances of this beautiful document we call our We the People Constitution. But what happens if the Congress is controlled by a party that says, our goal is to do what the president tells us? Suddenly that check and balance, the president, is gone. What if the court, the Supreme Court, says we want to, regardless of what's written in the Constitution, hand more power to the president? And they say, you know what, we'll make the president above the law, which they did in a law case last year. And suddenly you have the three elements that create tyranny in place of freedom. or authoritarianism in place of a republic. And those are a rubber-stamped Congress, a deferential court, and an aggressive authoritarian personality with a good plan. And he came in with a good plan called Project 2025. And the chief engineer on that Trumpian tyranny train is Russell Vought at OMB. So every essential element of the authoritarian takeover of the United States is here right now. Now, you mentioned a reverberation about how the president's policies are making people sicker and poorer. And here is the connection. When you have an authoritarian government, it basically operates to the power of the billionaires. And so we saw it at the inauguration. We saw the billionaires standing behind the president. We saw Elon Musk standing behind the president. We saw Jeff Bezos standing behind the president. We saw Mark Zuckerberg standing behind the president. And when you do that, you're okay pursuing legislation that hurts families while helping billionaires. And that is the theme of what we have seen. Here's a picture of the billionaires lined up behind the president. We call sometimes the bill, his major policy bill, the great or the big ugly betrayal, because he campaigned on helping ordinary people. But then on Inauguration Day, there's no ordinary people behind him. There's no champions for health care, no champions for housing, no champions for education, no champions for good-paying jobs and investment in infrastructure. No, those who have already at the very top of the money pyramid in the United States of America are there. So now you have the main bill, and the main bill, what does it do? Well, it savages health care to pay for tax breaks for billionaires. It savages child nutrition to pay for tax breaks for billionaires. So the authoritarian takeover of our government is also linked to this assault on the families. As you said, groceries are going up. The president's employing tariffs that drive up the cost of groceries. If he was looking to help families, he wouldn't choose to do tariffs that drive up the cost of families. And in fact, the president doesn't even have authority under the law to do tariffs to begin with, which he just took it because that's what authoritarians do until the courts stop him. And the courts, moving slowly, have not acted. And you mentioned health care costs going up. Well, I don't know about what the new costs are in your state of New Jersey. In Oregon, the projection was a 68% increase in costs on the exchange. But nationwide, 114% average, meaning Oregon, well, as much as we're shocked by 68% inflation in health care policies, well, nationally, it's more than doubling. So think of all the people who will be unable to acquire insurance. And that's just a piece of the big ugly betrayal bill, because then you get into the fact that they gutted Medicaid, the Oregon health plan. 70% of the children in rural Oregon are on the Oregon health plan. Think of the devastation when 235,000 Oregonians are projected to lose health care. And what happens when they get sick and they don't go to the hospital because they don't have insurance? So then they get sicker, and when they do go to the hospital, it's the emergency room. And maybe the modest health problem has become a major health problem. Maybe the diabetes that easily controlled has become a foot amputation or an eye problem, an eyesight problem. Maybe the cancer has grown or spread around the body. So not only is an illness more expensive to treat, but the odds of recovery are worse, and it's being treated in the most expensive part of a hospital, the emergency room. And then, because there's no insurance to pay for it, the hospital or clinic gets less revenues, and then they have to shut down programs or shut down completely, and then we have less health care for everyone in the community. And then you mentioned utilities, and I was just fielding a question from our colleague from Minnesota, and she said, what about that $8 billion attack on energy projects in blue states? Energy projects that would produce renewable energy that often, at utility scale, is 2 cents per kilowatt hour. My bill in Oregon is fairly cheap compared to the nation. I think it's 12 to 14 cents per kilowatt hour. I'm guessing yours is a lot higher than that. So if that utility can buy energy at 2 cents per kilowatt hour, your bill's going to go down. But I'm pretty sure your bill's going up because of the policies of this administration. So if this administration was worried about families, they wouldn't have passed the big ugly betrayal that does so much damage to families in order to fund tax breaks for billionaires, wouldn't be using tariffs in this manner, wouldn't be cutting low-cost utility projects that will lower the cost of energy. And thus, here we are, 10 months of making Americans sicker and poorer.
And if my colleague would ask the wrong question, because you're making such a great point, and I really hope America hears this, that these policies, these constitutional principles that we're defending here are not just arcane, idealistic things. They have a direct impact on our nation. My colleague is laying it plain. This is what should be animating everybody, is that when you attack the health care of millions of Americans, it doesn't mean you're curing disease and they're not going to have a demand for health care. The demand is still going to be there. And if they're not getting their health care reimbursed, if they're not getting preventative care, if they're not getting regular checkups, they're going to put more demand on our hospitals, which are going to make our hospitals have longer wait times in the emergency rooms, that are going to have our hospitals have less reimbursed care, and our hospitals are going to strain and buckle under that, thus driving up the costs for everyone. You make it plain, and people should hear this. When the president lies to the American people and says he's about all of the above energy costs, he's not. He's about advantaging certain energy over other energy, and it's actually the lower cost energy that he's attacking. Those projects are actually going to lower people's bills. So here he is raising the healthcare costs for everyone, hurting the hospitals that we all rely on, and driving up energy costs for everyone, and giving an advantage to our competitors like the Chinese, who are racing on energy projects in the renewable energy space. But it's even more than that, as my colleague knows. When you have boneheaded attacks on our Constitution, as opposed to going through Congress where there's deliberation and debate, you are actually raising costs in other ways too. As my colleague knows, Americans right now are seeing the investments that we make that return for the taxpayer significant returns in science and research. We are a nation that has exploded industries that the rest of the world is trying to catch up to us. We are the nation that invented so many great things by funding research, basic research and technology. And so attacks on universities, where they are now reporting less postdoc programs, less PhD programs, less research going on in America, you are ceding the pathway to human endeavor. You're closing it off. As my colleague was saying, attacks on universities, making them come and bend a knee. Those universities are saying, no, I will not bow to you, you are not my king. And then that king, wannabe king, cuts fundings to our greatest research institutions, not in America, the greatest research institutions on the planet Earth that have spawned new innovations, from quantum computing to fission and fusion, to robotics, to medical sciences. When you cut off the resources to those things, you are starving the goose that has been laying the golden egg for human endeavor, for industries and more. It has a cost when a president goes rogue and does what he wants to do. It has a cost, not just to our liberty, when you make universities, when you make businesses, when you make law firms bow before you or be punished by you. It has a cost to our liberty, but it also has, as you are saying so plainly, what most Americans are saying over and over again, is it has a cost financially to American families who are right now struggling. As you have said time and time again over these last dozen-plus hours, Americans are hurting. Americans are afraid. Americans are worried that they're going to get a diagnosis from a doctor that's going to drive them to bankruptcy. Americans don't know how they can take care of a sick child and pay the rent. And this is directly being attacked by a president who is doing things that are driving up their energy costs, who are driving up their medical costs, who are driving up their grocery costs, and who is failing to make the investments that keep America ahead of the competition we are seeing in places like China. It is boneheaded. It is financially imprudent. It is hurting America as well as our constitutional framework. The genius of our founders in this great experiment that is now 250 years old, that has put us at the top of all of humanity in innovation, in human success, is now being jeopardized after 250 years by a president who is claiming authorities that the Constitution and our framers never intended to rely to be in the executive. And so, God bless America, my colleague from Oregon is giving a master's class today. A master's class now for 14 plus hours, closing in on 15. A master's class in helping people understand not just constitutional principles, but how all of us are invested in this Constitution, how all of us are invested in making sure that nobody steps outside of those constitutional authorities, because when it does, we have seen what has happened when McCarthyism rose. We have seen what's happened when demagoguery trumps common sense, common cause, common purpose, and a shared devotion to that flag. And so I ask my colleague right now, we haven't even had a year of this president, and we have watched things happen where this body has not even called an oversight hearing, when our very national security was in jeopardy, when you have Americans at the highest level of our Defense Department using a commercial app with reporters on it to release classified information. We didn't hold one oversight hearing. When we took the extrajudicial step to blow up speedboats, there has been no oversight into that claimed attack on people that were allegedly smuggling drugs. We are constantly not doing our job, which is not a partisan one. It is to hold this president in check, that no one operates without accountability and without transparency, because power is corrupting. And when you let someone do what they want to do, when they want to do it, without a check or a balance, it is corrupting. And we know that because we have the most corrupt president, dollar for dollar, of any president we've ever seen, through his crypto schemes, from him exchanging his authorities for compensation that makes him a richer man. Unchecked power leads to corruption. Our founders knew it and designed this system thusly. And so I ask my colleague now, that sense of urgency of a president who has been in office nearly 10 months, if my colleagues in this body do not start standing up and doing their job, holding hearings on his tariff policy, holding hearings on his agricultural policy, holding hearings on his healthcare policies, and I say that generously, because they're not policies, they're not thoughtful, they don't reflect the wisdom on both sides of the aisle. They are hurting people. If we continue to let this president proceed unchecked, if we continue to let him flaunt the rules of our Constitution, if we continue in open eyes to do things like he is doing right now by ripping apart the White House, not going through any of the process whatsoever, that is literally contrary to the laws of what the people's house, not Donald Trump's house, the people's house, if we continue to let him go in this way without checks or balances, I ask my colleague, what are the consequences that you fear might happen in the next 10 months where this president, who wants to be an autocrat, is in the White House?
The consequences of the failure of oversight are enormous. This is not one of the checks and balances people often talk about. They talk about Congress having the responsibility to define which programs will be funded and how much, under what rules they'll operate on, and the president has to execute those programs, therefore a separation of powers. And by holding on to that responsibility, we serve as a check on the effort for an authoritarian to be the force that decides which programs are funded and how much they're funded at and how much rules or what the rules will be they operate under. And we're seeing that transfer of power right now from the Congress to the president, because the president's deeply engaged in essentially the equivalent of a line item veto by slow-walking funds, by freezing funds, by impounding funds, by slowly getting to the end of the year, and then by filing a rescission request at the end of the year, watching them magically evaporate when the last day of the fiscal year comes. This fancy term called a pocket rescission. Absolutely, all of these are part of a line item veto strategy, and the president just implementing the programs willy-nilly the way he wants, as opposed to following the instructions from Congress. So in 9 months, we have seen not just an attack on the freedoms, we've seen not just an attack on the cost of living through utilities and through food and through health care going up and up and up, but we have also seen this fundamental collapse of oversight that you've pointed to. If this much damage to the checks and balances can be done from January to October, if this much damage is done to costs that Americans experience from January to October, if this much damage can be done to American freedoms from January to October, then that next 10 months, that's amplified, because the administration's in full gear now. They're not diverting attention trying to get a Secretary of Defense confirmed. They're not diverting attention trying to get the head of the FBI confirmed. No, they're in full gear now with this set of instructions that flow from this plan, Project 2025, developed by our current director of OMB, Russell Vogt. And he is one capable individual who has a belief in the supreme primacy of the executive branch, calls it a unitary executive, and that the president should make the decisions about what's funded and how it's funded. The president should make the decisions about the rules for those programs. And that means the collective knowledge of these 100 senators, bringing their diverse life experience, their diverse education, their diverse knowledge of different parts of the country. All of that diverse experience is tossed out. The diverse experience from our 400-plus members of the House of Representatives is tossed out because, no, it's the president and his team saying these programs, at this amount of money under these rules, that is what the authoritarian rule is. And one way we can exercise a check on it is through oversight, is by holding those hearings to investigate in public and doing it in partnership, full partnership with our Republican colleagues. I mean, that should be a collective goal of us all together who believe in the vision of the Constitution, of this check and balance. And out of that information flows action items. When you oversee and see what's going on, then you get together and say, what's going wrong? Let's fix it. But you can't get to the point of saying, let's fix it, if you've got your eyes covered up, your hands over your ears, your head in the ground, and saying, I don't want to look at the administration. I know a lot of bad shit is going on over there, but man, that's the president of my party, and if I dig into that, he's going to be very upset. And we have seen how he is personally directing criminal investigations about people who have criticized him. There is concern by some of our colleagues, rightly so, that if they be the ones to speak up and say this is wrong, they will be next on the list, the enemies list. And when you think about the fact that on that enemies list is even our own fellow senator, like this is people who he was unhappy with because they said that the 2020 election wasn't stolen. And so now he's going after them. In one case, he lifted the security clearances, not just for the person who spoke up and said the president, Trump, is wrong about the government, the election being stolen, but he took the security clearance from all of his coworkers. So a collective punishment strategy. This idea of weaponizing the Department of Justice, this intimidation of free speech, that really does affect people in this chamber as well as outside this chamber for fear of being targeted. And indeed, one way they can be targeted is through their own folks back home. So when one of our senators said, this big, beautiful bill is a train wreck for health care and I'm not voting for it, within hours, that colleague had been threatened with a primary and announced, you can't threaten me with the primary because I won't run for election. Everyone else looks at that and goes, that's the power that is being brought to bear to create a failure for there to be oversight, for there be people speaking up, because I know across the aisle as many people care about the vision of our Constitution and our responsibility to sustain that framework for our freedom, for our financial success, far into the future, for the generations to come. I know they care about it, but right now, they're looking, we've got a powerful executive who can bring the world down on me. And I'm hoping somehow we will have a few courageous folks to be at the front of the line and say, I'll take the hit. I'll stand up and say what everyone else is saying privately, that this is outrageous, an outrageous attack on freedom, an outrageous attack on the structure of our Constitution, an outrageous increase in the cost for ordinary families, that the vision of families lose and billionaires win is wrong for the people that I represent in my home state, regardless of it being blue or red, that the idea that health care is being slashed for tax breaks for billionaires is wrong, that nutrition programs are being cut for tax breaks for billionaires is wrong. We need our colleagues to join us in this effort so it is not partisan, it is bipartisan, and we're standing up for the core principles on which our country was founded. I thank so much my colleague from New Jersey.